many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission. The task before us will not be easy, but I will bring every ounce of energy, spirit, and fight that I have in my soul to the job that you've rolled. Just as I did in my first term, we had a great first term, a great first term. The divisions of the past 4 years behind us, it's time to unite. And we're going to try, we have to try, and it's going to happen. Success will bring us together. I've seen that. I saw that in the first term when we became more and more successful. People started coming together. Success is going to bring us together, and we are going to start by all putting America first. We have to put our country first for at least a period of time. We have to fix it. Because together we can truly make America great again for all Americans. So I want to just tell you what a great honor this is. I want to thank you. I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Former President Trump making about 25 minutes worth of remarks, essentially acknowledging that he has been called by other networks, not this one so far, as the next president of the United States, coming out with family and supporters there, a crowd that had waited a considerable amount of time, but obviously eager and happy about the outcome of the evening. As we said, NBC News has not projected that he is over the top yet, but he has a clear path to victory and the White House at this point.
And we just saw Barron Trump, 18 years old, cast his first vote in a general election for president today for his father. And people say that Barron Trump has actually had a lot of ideas about having his father appeal to young men his age.
One of the young men
seems to be part of the coalition that we're seeing take shape now.
You heard from former President Trump there. Again, we have not called the race for president for him. We have called the race for Pennsylvania for him, and that appears to be the critical key for him to get to 270 at some point throughout the course of the early evening. He has not officially won the popular vote yet, although he is leading on that front. We have not officially called control of the House of Representatives yet. That could take a while. He clearly feels confident about that, saying that they've won. Again, that is not the case just yet. The Republicans do have control of the Senate, but you heard former President Trump there say that we have an unprecedented and powerful mandate at this historic moment here. He is now, we officially call the race, would be the oldest president ever elected, only the second president elected to a non-consecutive term. You saw him basking in the moment. At one point, he looked around and said something like, "Isn't this crazy?" I mean, he looked around and said that this even happened. He was extremely confident, at least publicly projecting that in the days before this moment.
He talked about having almost lost his life at an assassin's bullet this summer, and talked about how he feels that some of his supporters, or at least feel that he was saved for this moment, and so he took that tone as well.
And Savannah, he called it the greatest political comeback in the history of this country. He might not be wrong if you think about that. He survived 2 assassination attempts, right? One that was very close. 90 criminal accounts, right? He was in court throughout his campaign. He was primaried, won that primary, fought all those criminal cases. A lot of them are still ongoing right now. Again, survives the assassination attempts, loses his mother-in-law. A lot happened to him over the last 2 years. And here we are at this moment again where it looks like he's on his way to re-election.
Yeah, he's supposed to be sentenced, I think, the 26th of November on felony charges.
And that, even saying that sentence here, right, in this moment, is unprecedented.
You have to
right?
wonder, though, and I think we'll have to go back and look. I mean, was that what turned it for him on some level?
He would tell you that it is.
Yeah,
So the minute he started
called it a
getting indicted,
persecution.
especially that New York case that was
Fundraising
regarded
numbers
as,
went up.
Those poll numbers went up. I mean, you could see the lines, the graph. I mean, Governor DeSantis thought he was on his way to the nomination. He was leading in all the polls. All the criminal indictments start, and his numbers start to shoot up. Democrats, even though they said they were following the letter of the law, some Democrats, Republicans will say, played politics with the law, and they went after him for political reasons. That might have been the biggest political miscalculation in the history of our country.
And you talk to a lot of Democrats, they wonder if perhaps it took the Department of Justice just too long to get this process moving. I mean, if you talk to the folks that sat on the January 6th Select Committee, they wanted the DOJ to move a lot faster than until the Select Committee had done all of its work and then handed those referrals over to the Department of Justice. We were already into the campaign season. It became a political issue instead of a legal issue, and that may be something that they look back on and regret.
It was really the big X factor hanging over this entire race. How would his legal challenges impact his political prospects? But just zooming out, we're talking about how historic this moment is. You have to take a moment to think about how historic Donald Trump is as a political figure. Think about when he first ran for office back in 2015 and made disparaging comments about Senator John McCain in that moment. And what we have learned from having covered Donald Trump is that he is immune to things that not be able to survive. And now here we have this extraordinary campaign where he has survived 2 assassination attempts, where he's on the track to be the oldest president in office. And again, just the second person in 100 years to serve non-consecutive terms.
Let's talk about that mandate that he has claimed, a mandate that's political speak for saying the people have spoken. My election win was so convincing that I have been sent to do X, Y, and Z. So, Ryan, you'll be covering Capitol Hill.
Right.
What is that mandate, do you think?
Well, I think, first off, there is one person that's probably watching the returns coming in, still very closely watching a lot of House races across the country, and his name is Hakeem Jeffries, who is poised to potentially become the first black Speaker of the House. The House is very much in doubt right now, and if Democrats still controlled the House, that's going to be a big red light to any Donald Trump legislative agenda. Even though the margins are going to be tight on any level, it's going to be very difficult for him to push through a lot of these big ticket items that he's talking about. But to your point, Savannah, it is going to be very hard for even the more moderate Republicans who don't necessarily describe themselves from the MAGA wing of the party to resist the pull has accomplished here tonight. He definitely has the pulse of the people, especially the people that voted for him. And
we saw in these results tonight just how divided, how divisive things have become. Donald Trump has not necessarily run on a unity message.
Do you think he has a mandate of unity?
No, I don't. But I do think that there is going to be a hunger for that. It's something that former President Barack Obama promised, that President Biden has promised. It hasn't happened yet. The country has only gotten more divided over time. I think the nation's hungry for
And
that.
Savannah, he set a high bar. He has set a high bar. He said he's going to figure out what's happening in Ukraine with Russia. He's going to solve it on day one. And also the war in Gaza with Israel. He's going to have 2 giant issues that you could argue had a huge impact on this presidential election. And he said on day one he's going to solve them. Well, he set the bar. What will he be able to do? And the entire world's watching this election right now. We're talking about all the issues at home. The entire world. There's a new president in Mexico. What's going to happen with immigration? There's so much going on right now globally. And now Donald Trump, once again, reelected. It's going to shake up the global political
And the
force.
things he can do unilaterally, such as tariffs, for example, which will have an immediate effect on the economy. So, I mean, look, when he has the levers of government, he has the United States Senate, he might have the House.
some might argue he has the Supreme Court as well.
I was just about to say he's got the ideological balance as the Supreme Court. He may get to appoint 1 or 2 more.
right.
And so when you have all of that power and the responsibility, you also have the accountability. So if he has this mandate and acts on it, then in another couple of years, we'll be talking right here at this table about whether or not Americans approve of the job that's been done.
And in some ways, divisive policies. When you look at even that sort of core tenet of pathway for immigrants here, a legal pathway to citizenship, then they would mass deportations. The other interesting point here is who he is going to be surrounding himself with, which we've touched on tonight. And it was interesting to watch that speech. He shouted out Elon Musk. You heard the Dana White, UFC head, shout out to Joe Rogan, the super popular podcaster. This is the we're going to let him go do it.
Just go get him, Bobby.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It was sort of notable in the anti-vaccine community. So I think it's going to be obviously something to watch who he installs in some of these key roles here as he moves forward.
Well, you remember the inauguration speech at American Carnage? That really set the tone. That was
It did,
that
Lester.
and the crowd size.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, look, he has always been defined by, I think, his approach to immigration, illegal immigration in this country. Obviously, during his first term, he was going to build the wall. Mexico was going to pay for the wall. Now he's going to, he says, enact this mass deportation force. So we will have to see what that looks like, what the contours of that look like, and how that plays out. But again, that at the very core, when you think about what he's going to do on day one, and this got a lot of questions for both of these candidates, that was one of the things.
And I have to wonder, too, when it comes to immigration, Kristen, this was something that Democrats, it took them too long to figure this out, but this was something Democrats recognized was a problem that they were losing a significant amount of support around and that needs to be fixed. And there's certainly no universe where Democrats are going to support mass deportation.
Right.
But they put forward the most conservative border bill in a generation, a whole suite of policies that in a normal universe Republicans would have supported. Could that be the first opportunity for them to find some common ground? Let's do something on the border immediately. Let's strengthen and secure the border, find a way to allow people to enter the country legally. We've been talking about them trying to solve immigration in Washington for generations.
Generations,
but
yes.
Could this be the opening? Because especially if the Democrats control the House, he's not going to be able to just ram through whatever he wants.
And I wonder if he calls Greg Abbott in Texas and says thank you, because Greg Abbott, remember, busing the migrants from the border to cities all across America and putting immigration on the front page of every major newspaper day after day after day, a huge issue right here in New York City.
Let's go to Garrett Haake. Garrett is still at the Trump headquarters. Garrett, you've been listening to the conversation. What would you like to add?
Well, a couple things, Lester. First of all, I heard a former president who sounded surprised to be back up on that stage, that moment about saying how crazy this was. You know, I've been at all his last rallies these last few weeks. I was at his news conference today. They all sort of had a little bit of a valedictory feel, as if he wasn't sure that he was going to have the opportunity to address these crowds or address reporters again, which he will now have. You mentioned the idea of promises made, promises kept. He has a lot of promises that he's going to have to keep, and he's been adding to them basically every day of this campaign, rolling out new policies time and again, oftentimes without explaining how he'd pay for them. In the middle of this campaign, he talked about a free IVF program that would be paid for by the government or by insurance. He almost never mentioned it again, but these are things that are out there, and I think this coalition that he has built are going to expect action on. The other thing that I'll notice, I'll just say, you know, for folks who have not seen a lot of Trump rallies, you kind of got a expedited version of a Trump rally here tonight with a little bit of unity added to it, but not a lot. And I say that because of two things I didn't hear. I never heard the name Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, and I never heard any mention of their supporters, millions of them, tens of millions of them, who he will now, it appears, be the president for again. And he did say at that news conference today that, you know, he wanted to try to reach out to those people. I'm not sure when that outreach will start, but other than sort of broadly saying he wants to heal this country and talking about his agenda, we did not hear that from Donald Trump tonight.
That's a good point. Do we know if there's been any communication this evening between the two camps?
I have asked everyone who I can think would know that information up to and including Donald Trump himself, and I don't know yet, Lester. I mean, the Harris campaign has not indicated that they think this race is over yet, so I'd be surprised if there's been a phone call between them.
All right, Garrett Haake, thank you at the headquarters there. And we heard again from the Harris folks that she will speak sometime tomorrow, that we will not hear from her tonight. There was just a brief remarks to the crowd, basically telling them to go home, back to work tomorrow. Of course, since that, we've seen Donald Trump win in Wisconsin, now in a position, I'm sorry, not win in Wisconsin.
Minnesota. No, that was
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Harris has won
Long night, folks.
in Minnesota.
We've also got those other calls, I believe, coming in, and you would know this, Tom, but on CD2 in Nebraska. At this point, it's just the math, figuring out how to get to 270 here. I will say, as one of the conversations we're having here about what this term would look like for former President Trump here and the dynamics back home where we are in Washington between the House, the Senate, the White House. You talked about, Ryan, the possibility of a Democratic control of House, Republican control of the Senate. I do wonder, and I think the question is out there, what does that Democratic, quote-unquote, resistance look like? Not just in Congress, but more broadly across the country. I think one thing you've heard from Democrats, some of them are exhausted, right? And this was the case that Kamala Harris was trying to make. Like, we're all so tired of this. Let's move on. Let's have a fresh start. And I just wonder, on the Democratic side, what is the energy to sort of, again, quote unquote, resist here in this potential?
Well, and the Trump team has said they're afraid that he's going to be quote unquote impeached on day one, and that's been part of their message.
I mean, we are in this era of impeachments, right? I mean, it seems as though there's an impeachment inquiry for every president that takes office. And, you know, we did talk a little bit about maybe there's areas for them to find common ground and work together on things. I think the more realistic outlook here is that the Democrats do and will view the Democratic-controlled House, if it turns out that way, and we're nowhere near ready to call it that, that they would become the last line of defense against whatever they see the Donald Trump agenda being. And it would be beyond just stopping the legislation that he would put on the floor. There's a congressman by the name of Jamie Raskin who currently serves as the ranking member on the Oversight Committee. If they win the majority, he would become the chair of the Oversight Committee. That would give him subpoena power. That would give him the opportunity to launch all these investigations into the Trump administration, much like his contemporary James Comer has done with the Biden administration. So there's a whole suite of options that the Democratic-led House could have should they win the majority. If they don't win the majority, then it's a whole different game.
What does the retribution path look like, though, that we've heard so much about?
Well, that's
not what he said, but what he'll do.
That's the open question. I mean, will he go after his political rivals legally? What specifically does that look like? Now, look, his aides and allies have tried to downplay that. They've said, look, that's not what he meant. You're taking that out of context. But it is what he said. And so
he's got supporters.
He said just days ago that it'll be, in his words, nasty in the beginning, right? Which I think Democrats took as an allusion to the potential for this so-called enemies list, as Vice President Harris
absolutely. And the first thing he says he's going to do is fire Jack Smith, of course, the special counsel who's brought these charges against him. So that's the first act, potentially, of retribution, if you want to put it into that category. But I do think there's a big question mark. I have asked him about it in my interview with him over a year ago. What specifically do you mean by retribution? He wouldn't get specific. I think a lot of reporters have tried to drill down on exactly what that would look like. And again, much like the mass deportation plan, there aren't a whole lot of specifics. There's not a policy paper that's been put out to give people a sense of what it would look like or how it would be carried out. But there is a sense that he already is amassing a team of people who
the first signal will probably be who he appoints as his attorney general.
I was about to say that,
It has always prided itself on is the independence of the Department of Justice, the fact that they don't take their marching orders from the president after they're appointed to that job. Donald Trump has said multiple times that he doesn't think it should be like that anymore. So if he picks someone who's very dyingly loyal to him as Attorney General, something he didn't do when he appointed Jeff Sessions the first time around, I think that'll be our first signal as to just how much he's going to use the DOJ.
Who does he listen to?
In general, or
in general?
Kellyanne Conway's still, I mean, outside advisor, but still someone who he
still
listens
people in his
to.
ear.
He listens to his family, too, still.
To his family.
I think Stephen Miller is somebody
That's right.
who he talks to on a regular basis. He could be somebody who we might see as the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, possibly.
He's also somebody, I think we've all talked to in different contexts. He's somebody who will sort of listen to a degree, people who are around him, you know, whoever he happens to be with in the moment. And I think a lot of us have had the, just even as journalists here, and he'll do that with people at Mar-a-Lago, et cetera. That is what Democrats find concerning, and that's what Republicans in some ways find appealing.
Let me send it back out to Garrett Haake at the Trump headquarters. Garrett?
Lester, and I could jump in on that conversation too, because having covered Trump for a long time, the question of who he listens to is almost everyone, and it can be anyone around him, from his friends at Mar-a-Lago to elected officials to the folks who find and collect his phone number to try to reach out to him on any given issue. In fact, in many cases, there's almost a penalty applied to people who are on his payroll. If you take his money, if you are his staff, in some cases, he trusts you less than the people who might be people he views as friends and peers. Although we heard tonight an extraordinary moment, frankly, Trump calling up his co-campaign managers to try to get them here to speak tonight. I think indicative of what has been a campaign that was, at least in Trump standards, almost entirely without the kind of drama and backbiting that defined his two previous campaigns and his White House. And I think looking at that model as he starts to think about how he's going to staff his White House and build out his cabinet might be important. I can tell you there's already a lot of discussion, some of it among reporters, some of it among staff, many of whom are quite superstitious about discussing it before tonight, about what the transition is going to look like, who might be in line for various appointments. I can tell you from talking to sources in the donor community and a lot of lawmakers who Ryan and I cover on Capitol Hill, particularly in the Senate, people starting to get a little bit sharp-elbowed about viewing what cabinet positions might be available to them, what opportunities might be available to serve in this second Trump administration. I think there was a thinking about Republican senators and whether or not they would potentially be asked to serve in a cabinet if the Senate was narrowly divided, depleting their own numbers on other things they have to do. But if we're looking at a significant margin in the Senate, all of a sudden, anybody from a state that's even remotely safe might find themselves considered for a cabinet position. And the cabinet's going to do a lot of work here, especially if the House ultimately ends up controlled by Democrats. Donald Trump made it clear in his first term he's not at all shy about using executive authority to its maximum level. He's been backstopped on that by the Supreme Court, backstopped again since he's been out of office with that ruling on immunity, essentially saying any official acts can't be criminally prosecuted. And the policies that he's laid out on the campaign trail, particularly his economic plan, the tariffs that he wants to put in place, are things that he can do unilaterally and may begin doing quite quickly, at least if he's going to keep all the promises that he's laid out for himself in the first early weeks of his campaign. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to you in the studio.
All right, Garrett, thanks very much. I've stepped over to the big board with Tom Llamas to drill down on where we are right now. NBC News has not called this race yet. We still got Donald Trump at 266. How does he? What's his path now to finish up this?
Yeah, and we just want to make sure, we're absolutely right about all this. At some point, we will call Alaska. That almost always goes red. That gets him to 269. You come over to Maine again. We haven't called the races in Maine yet. Maine, like Nebraska, gives out its electoral votes by popular vote. It'll probably go blue, and then by congressional districts. And Congressional District 2, CD2, it's usually a red district. And once we do that, you can see his number there, Lester. He gets to 270. It hasn't happened at this point yet. We expect that to happen at some point. We will project that once it happens, but we're just not there yet. We're not trying to keep anything away from former President Trump. We're just not there in the night yet.
Right. And so the headline of this night would be, because you went through state by state, and we kept seeing the same thing: underperform, underperform, underperform. Is that the story?
The story is he overperformed in the rural areas. She underperformed in the urban areas, in the big cities, in the counties. She needed to win. She was underperforming Biden pretty much in all the battleground states. And when we started the night, Lester, remember, we even did this last night on Nightly News, we showed you the easiest path for Trump. And it's not easy to become president, obviously, but the easiest path for him was to hold North Carolina. He did that, flip Georgia, and then win Pennsylvania, and he'd get to the White House. And tonight he's done that.
So you'd walked us through that. And so
we're still waiting on Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, and Arizona.
So officially, we're at 266 now, I think.
We're at 266 right now. We're at 266, right?
All
and we're
right.
waiting on Alaska and then the congressional districts in Maine.
Was this something that could have been anticipated, given what the polls down the stretch, the tie?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We had a call with the Trump campaign a few days ago, and they were bullish on their sort of prospects. But again, on those calls, they're sometimes trying to spin you. And, sometimes you take this with a grain of salt. Are they right? It turns out on that call, they were right on a lot of what they were seeing in their own data about the early voting. Once early voting started coming back in some of these states and Republicans were matching Democrats, that was a big sign to Democrats like, listen, wait a minute, things may be changing here. It may not be as easy as we thought. And no one thought it was going to be easy. Everyone thought it was going to be a coin flip. It was going to be so tight. But now looking back, and we can look back a little bit and maybe Monday morning quarterback and say there were signs there for Democrats to be a little nervous.
And Hallie, obviously Democrats have a lot ahead of them now as they try to work through this and find the lessons. Yeah. But that takes time.
Yeah,
these things don't get turned around even in 4 years.
And at this moment, I think there is, by all accounts and by the reporting that our teams are doing, a bit of a moment of shell shock here for Democrats, for folks who had worked to try to turn out the vote for Vice President Kamala Harris, who had hoped that tonight would be history-making in a very different kind of way, that instead of seeing, of course, Donald Trump elected, that the nation would see its first female president, its first president who was a woman of color. That is, by the math that you and Tom just laid out, looks to not be the case once Donald Trump does hit 270 electoral college votes. I'm struck by some reporting that members of our team put in from a Harris aide who talked about needing to find some love for the people, the other half of the country, not Democrats, right, not Harris backers, who chose to back former President Trump despite or perhaps because of his rhetoric here. And so I am curious to see, as morning, I was going to say night turns into day, but as early morning turns into later morning, where Democrats are on this. I think you heard some of it at the table when we were with former Senator Claire McCaskill, former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, about maybe a moment of soul searching for Democrats, what the brand is, what the outreach is to Americans here, especially when our exit polling shows that fewer people identify as Democrats right now. We saw that surge in people who said that they really weren't down with either party, Lester. And so that is also a factor here, I think, as Democrats are looking at what this moment means for them and how they move forward. I do also think that control of the House, and whether that goes Democratic or not, is also going to be a factor in this as well.
Okay, Hallie, thanks very much. We're going to take a quick break right here, and then we'll pick it right up with our colleagues Kate Snow and Craig Melvin.
Top story live from Paris, live in Tel Aviv.
We are here in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Every weeknight, it's your news playlist. Top Story with Tom Llamas, streaming weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
From NBC News, this is Decision 2024. Here are Craig Melvin and Kate Snow.
And welcome back. We continue our special coverage of election night here on NBC. Craig Melvin here alongside Kate Snow. Coming up on 3:20 here on the East Coast. Let us take a look at where we stand in that race to 270 with former President Trump on the cusp of making history once again with a return to the White House. Again, here's a look at where we stand at this hour. As you can see, the former president just 4 electoral votes shy of reaching that 270 threshold. It is widely expected he will do that here, perhaps in the next few hours. As you can see there, Vice President Kamala Harris stuck at 219 electoral votes. We had spent so much time talking about these battleground states over the past few weeks and months. So far, heretofore, the vice president hasn't picked up a single one.
Not a single one of the 7 that we've been following so closely. I want to note, he spoke a short time ago.
Yes.
He spoke at length. He invited a lot of people up on stage, talked about Elon Musk at length. There are parties going on around the country right now for President Donald Trump. There are people out there celebrating.
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that. Sure. This is a big night for half the country and a sort of dismal night for the other half.
We heard from Cedric Richmond, who is co-chair of the Harris for President campaign, acknowledging a few hours ago that we would not be hearing from the vice president tonight. She is expected to address her supporters, to address the country at some point tomorrow. But there had been, as you know, this huge party planned on the campus of Howard University. It was a party that never happened. But again, 4 electoral votes shy for the former president. Chuck Todd is here with us at the desk. So is Kelly O'Donnell. We've got Ryan Nobles as well, who covers Congress. So, Chuck, let's start with you. 4 electoral votes away. It's going to happen. The question at this point is how it's going to happen. Where does he get those 4?
Well, they could get it in Wisconsin. He still leads there. That you know, it's possible. It's hard to see a path for Harris to carry Wisconsin at this point. Alaska is one main. So the numbers are there. I think now the question is how much over 270 is he going to get?
To be clear for people maybe just joining at this hour, the numbers are not there for Harris.
They're just not there for Harris, and it doesn't look like. And what is in the blue wall, where she's coming up short, are in the cities. And what was interesting is during the early vote, you know, they were downplaying that, well, because the early vote showed rural voters came out big, suburban voters came out pretty big, but the urban numbers were down across the board, and they thought they were going to make it up on Election Day. They were looking at how much time she spent in Philadelphia even just 24 hours ago. But Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit, it's a familiar, this is the same story from 2016.
Yeah.
Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit. Turnout numbers are down there. Turnout in the red counties, through the roof.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, it's interesting because North Carolina, not that much of a surprise, perhaps. But if you look at how much time, to your point, that she spent in Pennsylvania, 3 rallies just yesterday alone, the amount of money both campaigns spent in Pennsylvania, you know, obviously they'll, you know, for the next hours, days, weeks, they'll be looking at precisely what happened there. But based on some of the exit polling that we've seen so far, based on some of the conversations that I know you guys have had there with folks from Pennsylvania, what do we know about what happened there?
What's so stunning is that her events in those places drew big crowds. There was an awareness that they did not want to see a repeat of 2016. Strategically, they did some things differently. And yet a real frustration on the part of Democrats who, at a certain point tonight, began to go quiet. And that was a real early indicator that what they were seeing was not going to support her getting across the finish line. It may be a function of misjudging some of the electorate. It may be those who thought she was doing well, didn't engage. There'll be a lot to dissect.
Yeah, when you look at all the different demographic groups that Kamala Harris had to do well in, she underperformed. When you look at all the different demographic groups that Donald Trump needed to do well in, he overperformed. I mean, we are going to be talking, and these are just early exit polls. They're going to be dissected, and we need to get all the data in. Sure. But the swing with Latino men in particular is something that no one saw
Double
coming.
digits. People were right about that for years.
Yeah, there was an expectation he was going to do better. The idea that it would be a swing, I think it was Joe Biden, a 23-point advantage before to a 13-point advantage for Donald Trump this time around, just that was something that wasn't on anybody's dance card leading into this race. And it's one of the indications that it seems pretty clear that he has built a working-class coalition that no president before him, at least not in this era, has.
And it's not just Latinos. It's you look at first-time voters lean towards Trump. You look at voters of color leaning towards Trump. Younger voters, especially men, coming out, younger men coming out for him.
Look, the current administration, the president, our exit poll is measuring him at a 40% job rating. this is
when
we
people
should,
assessed his
exactly.
term, his first term.
I'm talking about Joe Biden's
Oh, Joe
term.
Biden.
And I think let's not forget that is a huge organizing tool, if you will, for Donald Trump. This was considered a failed presidency. Our pollsters do their own election night survey, and he was sharing it's the #1 hesitation that they had, that they found among voters that they've talked to tonight about Harris was not enough distance from Biden. And you look at, and it was by far the biggest issue that voters had. And you cannot, I don't think we can sit here and sort of separate her from Joe Biden. Joe Biden was the driver of Donald Trump's comeback tonight. His unpopularity, whether, could more have been done, all sorts of things, but that is the driver of tonight.
And earlier tonight, some of the Harris aides that I was talking to said part of why they focused on turning the page was to not have her be attached as a direct incumbent. They wanted to try to have separation. Apparently too subtle a message for voters. And now Joe Biden, in the remaining weeks of his time in office, will have to contemplate how much of his legacy, legislation and ideas that will be dismantled with Donald Trump.
You just said something interesting, too subtle. I think this is going to be a lesson that the Democrats take away from Donald Trump. Why does Donald Trump succeed? He's anything but subtle.
Right. Yeah.
On all of these
what he
issues.
wants to say.
He says it very directly, at times making stuff up to make a larger point. And he'll say, yeah, that's not true, but I'm still trying to make a larger point about immigration, right? And that subtlety, I have a feeling Democrats are going to try to find their own version of unsubtle.
Hold that thought, Chuck Todd. We are actually going to take just a very, very quick break. But again, at this hour, it seems as if the 45th president of these United States will also be the 47th.
Closer to the Gaza border.
Welcome back to our Decision 2024 coverage. Almost 3:30 in the morning on the East Coast and 12:30 a.m. Pacific time. Kate Snow alongside Craig Melvin. You got a new cast of folks here at the desk as some of our colleagues go to get a little bit of sleep. But we are still talking, obviously, about former President Trump, likely to be the next president. We have not yet, for clarity, we have not yet called him or projected that he is the next president, but there really is no way, as Chuck Todd just laid out, for Harris to make up what she would need to become.
To be clear for folks who might just be joining us, what states have not been called so far?
So Wisconsin and Michigan have not been called, Arizona, Nevada, which we don't expect to. And I don't think we're calling Michigan tonight. Michigan's been very slow with their counting. So I don't think we'll have enough data there. Wisconsin, we're close.
Does Trump need one of those, or could he do it?
He actually doesn't need any of them. He could just do it with Alaska and Maine.
Yeah.
And, and Alaska's not going to be a blowout for him, so you got to wait to see some numbers out of Alaska, which also takes a while. The question is, does he win one of the two blue wall states that puts him over, at least as far as our count's concerned tonight?
And here's, again, for folks who might just be joining us, here is a look at the map where things stand right now. A number of surprises on that map for a lot of folks. I would assume, Chuck, there are a lot of folks, Kelly O, Mr. Ryan, Mr. Noble's there. Georgia, I think a lot of folks thought that Kamala Harris was going to be able to turn out enough folks in Atlanta and the suburbs.
I'll be honest, I was always a Georgia skeptic because there was a missing ingredient for Democrats this cycle. And the ingredient is Raphael Warnock.
Yes.
He was on the ballot in 20, and he was on the ballot in 22. And let's remember, on the ballot in 22, he still needed a runoff to defeat Herschel Walker. Right. Okay, he did not get 50% the first time around. Yeah. So this was a tall order. That's a good point. With Raphael Warnock. Yeah. Without him there, essentially as a running mate for the Democrats.
Yes.
Big loss.
And he repaired his relationship with the Republican governor, and that also helped.
For sure. All right. Again, just a very quick break here as we await what appears to be the inevitable, that 270 mark. Former President Trump declaring victory a short time ago. We'll have much more of our continuing coverage here on NBC right after this.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from the Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, the taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Let me get a hint.
It is 3:30 a.m. on the East Coast, 12:30 a.m. on the West Coast on an extraordinary election night as Donald Trump is poised for a historic return to the White House. The former president speaking just moments ago at his election headquarters at Mar-a-Lago, telling supporters that they made history tonight and vowing a new, quote, golden age in America. Take a look. Actually, we don't have the sound right now, but he did say a new golden age. He said we're going to help our country heal. He also said a couple of things that we have not verified. He said he won the popular vote. We're not sure if that's true. He said America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate.
Referred to it as the greatest political movement of all time.
The NBC Decision Desk has not yet called the presidency for Donald Trump. We should be clear on that, but it might be a matter of when at this point and not if. Let's take a look at where things stand in the battleground states. We'll start with Pennsylvania. We made this projection a short time ago. Was it an hour ago? Pennsylvania. NBC News Decision Desk projecting that Pennsylvania goes the way of Donald Trump, and that is essentially what pushed him over toward a victory. Again, we're not calling it just yet, but he is on the path to 270 because of Pennsylvania. In Georgia, Mr. Trump winning there as well. That's a state that Biden won in 2020. Now the projected winner, Donald Trump, with 50% of the vote. In North Carolina, Trump winning there as well. Another battleground state, 97% in, and you see the numbers. He wins with 51 to Kamala Harris's almost 50. In Michigan, we have not made a call here yet. It is too close to call. As of now, 81% of the vote in, waiting on some key counties there in Michigan. Wisconsin, the presidential two-way, too close to call, with Donald Trump up with 94% of the vote in, but not ready to project that just yet. In Nevada, we characterize it as well as too close to call, with 93% of the vote in Nevada. And in Arizona, we continue to say too early to call. We just don't have enough information yet to make a call in that race. Only 54% of the vote is in there. They had said that they might count for days. Let's take a look at the road to 270. You see the map there. A lot of red on that map, including Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. And then let's take a look at Congress.
Let's take a look at the upper chamber here. This is where things stand. Republicans projected to take control of the Senate at this hour. Not much of a surprise there in the upper chamber. Lots of questions, of course, at this hour about what's going to happen in the House of Representatives. As you can see there, net gain so far for Republicans of 3, but there are still some 5-6 dozen uncalled races there in the House. Ryan Nobles, we spent some time talking about Hakeem Jeffries, probably paying very close attention to our count there in the House. Hakeem Jeffries would become the first black Speaker of the House if Democrats are able to
And I really do have to caution our viewers that it could be days, maybe weeks before we know who wins the House of Representatives. For instance, just a few minutes ago, we called Michigan 7 for the Republican there. That's Alyssa Slotkin's old seat. She's currently running for Senate there, so that's not good news for Democrats. But yes, you're right. If Democrats are able to hold on to the House of Representatives, that would usher in a speaker. Hakeem Jeffries would be the first African-American Speaker of the House.
On the other hand, if Republicans take control of the House, I know you've talked about a lot of the rural areas where there are some really competitive races, not necessarily in battleground states, but even in places like California, upstate New York. If we're seeing former President Trump perform the way we're seeing in exit polls with so much strength in rural areas, do you think we could see potentially some real pickups?
I would say right now, as it stands, there's just as much chance that Republicans win the House as there is that Democrats win the House. It's literally a 50-50 race right now. But to your point, Kate, New York's a good example. I think of the 5 battlegrounds that we're watching in New York, 3 right now are trending Democrat, but Republicans have held on to a couple seats that they thought they might not be able to hold on to. In California, the returns are still coming in. It's a mixed bag. Republicans picking up some seats that they thought that they could pick up, losing in other areas that they couldn't. But there's also battlegrounds in New Mexico, in Arizona, Washington State. So there's a lot that still needs to be resolved. And like I said, it could take some time.
And if it does take time, that also creates a void for Democrats who might get the House.
Who's going to be their leader?
Who's going to fill this space, especially as Donald Trump is leaning into being reelected?
All right, Kelly O, stand by. By the way, it's great having you here on nights like this. Because Kelly O'Donnell, you've been covering nights like this since 1996, if I'm not mistaken.
My first one.
Chuck Todd, not quite as long, but a long time as well.
I'm 2000, just for the record.
There we go.
Chuck, what are we looking at over here, bud?
Well, I'm just showing you, I was just following the House, and here's why we're not going to know the House. Basically, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Republican-held seats in California. Yeah. The Democrats, I mean, in theory, they could net their 4 that they needed just out of California. But look, Republicans picked up a couple seats in Pennsylvania that they didn't expect to pick up. Don Bacon is not done yet. In Nebraska, too. That's one that, frankly, Democrats had been counting on already. So I'm with Ryan. Look, no matter what, the House is going to be single digits for either the Republicans or the Democrats. But, you know, you'd probably slightly rather be the Republicans right now, just slightly, given that they added a couple of pads, if you will, in Pennsylvania that just made it that much harder. Put it this way. Democrats probably have to take every one of their targets in California, and I don't think they will. And that's going to be the challenge.
Can I ask you to pivot back to the presidential race? Because it's been a while since we looked at the map and did the scenarios. Can you show us how former President Trump gets there?
Or it might be easier to show us how he can't get there.
Yeah. You said there's no way.
There really is. I mean, here, we can do it. I can show you. And here, I mean, at this point, if he just gets Alaska, which he's favored to do, he's just the 1 electoral vote short. And he is leading in the 2nd congressional district.
Maine is one of those states that doesn't do winner
just
take
like
all,
Nebraska.
Split things up.
Exactly. Maine, too, is the more rural of the 2 districts. He carried it both times. This would be the 3rd straight time he did it. We expect that. It's still a lot of votes still to count in Maine. But assuming that lead holds there, that gets him to 270. Without Wisconsin, without Michigan, without Nevada, without Arizona. And when you see the historic realignment that we're seeing tonight among Latino voters, it would be a stunner if somehow he didn't win Arizona when you look at the gains he made in New Mexico even and what they did in Texas. I mean, he increased his margin in Texas from what he did in 2020, increased his margin in Florida, decreased the Democratic margin in New Mexico. So it would be a shocker if somehow Arizona didn't continue to move in the same way.
I want to dig into that a little bit more, maybe perhaps next hour. But to Chuck's point here, I mean, the former president is poised to have, at the end of the night, perhaps later tomorrow, somewhere close to 300 electoral votes. I would assume that would be considered in most circles a mandate. If the former president has that kind of mandate, what does that mean legislatively?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One of them, for me, is what he didn't talk about tonight, and that is skepticism about the systems that produced this result. So does that put to bed his talking about elections can't be trusted? And that might be one important piece in sort of moving past that. On mandate, and I was struck by it when you used that word a moment ago, it does give him the political will to say, I talked about these number of things, both domestic and international, and I have the juice to get them done. And members of Congress would follow suit, I think.
Right, but the founding fathers did set up a system where he checks and balance, where he's got to get this through Congress, and Congress has set up its own rules where you're not just going to push anything through, particularly in the United States Senate, where even though they're poised to have big gains today, they could end up with 55, maybe even 56 seats. That's still 4 seats vote of what we call a supermajority. You can basically stop almost any piece of legislation if you don't have the full 60 votes. So that really takes off the table things like his mass deportation plan, things along those lines. But it's going to require Democrats to come to the table and try and find some areas where they can compromise with it.
I might argue Democrats may feel like they have to come to the table and work with, because, you know, one of the things we haven't talked about tonight is Donald Trump's improvement in blue states. I got to show you the state of Illinois. We're at 91% reporting. We know she's going to win it because we know how much. Look at this change, okay? Joe Biden won Illinois by nearly 18 points.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is going to win it probably by 5 once all is said and done. Okay, that's Illinois. Let me take you to a few other blue states here.
Virginia.
We've seen Virginia as another one where you saw where, again, and this has been, even in every blue county, she sort of underperformed. But Virginia, 10 points. It's going to be 5 points there. We can, let's see if it's a problem in every blue state. Look, here's Maryland.
Yeah.
He won it by 33 points. She's going to win it by 22 points. I mean, he picked up ground everywhere, and a lot of it has to do with this realignment of two major groups. One is obviously Latinos, and the second appears to be young men, younger men.
Chuck, thank you. Let me go out to NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. He's standing by for us. He's at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Vaughn, I don't know if you could hear our conversation, but we're talking about the kind of mandate that President Trump may have and what his agenda might be. Can you help us with that?
Right. I think it's a good conversation around not only the realignment, but I think that this is, when we're talking about a mandate here, Donald Trump ran, especially here in these final months of the campaign, I mean, his most pure, unvarnished self. He told Americans exactly what he intends to do, from mass deportations to putting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in charge of the U.S. health agencies that even dictate the vaccines that are on the market. He went as far as to say that he'll have Elon Musk who go in and make efficient by Elon Musk's own suggestion. That's $2 trillion, which U.S. discretionary annual budget is about $1.7 trillion. So you're talking about, where do you cut? Is that Social Security, Medicare, defense spending? There's a lot of serious questions about policy implications that are going to be had in these weeks and months ahead if, in fact, Donald Trump is to ascend and take the White House in 2025 here. And again, when we're talking about that mandate, American voters for the last 2 years have heard Donald Trump on the campaign trail, right, promise to go after his political enemies and use the Department of Justice as his own tool to go and investigate and bring charges against him. And American decision here today to the extent that they came and turned out. And I think that this is where, for those individuals that are close to Donald Trump, his allies, they have consistently said that Donald Trump is the one who is running the show of this campaign. There was no effort from any campaign managers to try to moderate him or get him to focus or stay on teleprompter. This was Donald Trump in his purest form. And now Donald Trump getting that mandate to go into the side of the White House and essentially act as the chief executive of the United States in the way that he has promised the last 2 years to do.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard for us. Vaughn, stand by for us if you can, please, sir, because we want to go to your counterpart there in Washington, D.C., NBC's Yamiche Alcindor. She's there at the Bureau. You have been following the Kamala Harris campaign since it launched. Any idea at this point, Yamiche, based on the conversations that you've been having with folks inside that campaign, when did it take a turn for the vice president? When did they know she was in trouble?
It's a key question, Craig. I was talking to Harris officials all night, and they really began the night very confident, feeling very joyful. I heard the idea that they were cautiously optimistic, and the vice president has been saying for the last 3 days that she felt like she had the momentum in this race and that she was going to win. That's what she was telling crowds. But around 10:30, when it started becoming very clear that former President Trump was making gains, and exit polls were showing that he was overperforming in key areas, including in North Carolina and Georgia, it became clear to the Harris campaign aides that I was talking to that she was in trouble. And I started hearing words like deflated. I started hearing words like, it feels like a funeral here, especially at Howard University, which was her alma mater. There were hundreds, thousands of people gathered there. They started getting very quiet. They started being very sort of blank stares, started forming on people's faces. And then over the course of the last few hours, including just in the last hours as I've been texting people with former President Trump winning Pennsylvania, people are telling me now that they're pivoting toward looking at how to deal with Trump's policies and how to find love for people that they might disagree with. So definitely a change here.
All right. Yamiche Alcindor for us there in Washington. Yamiche, we'll check back in with you as well in just a bit.
Our special coverage of the 2024 election continues. Stay with us. We're going to take a look at our data wall and where the state of the race stands. We have so much to dig into about how this historic night unfolded, how this election unfolded. Stay with us.
With us, whether you're at home or on our plaza, we're just glad you're with us this morning.
News lives in the now.
Look at this. You can't even see anything anymore.
Let's break down what we know.
You gotta see this.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
And welcome back. Our coverage of the 2024 election continues. If you are just joining us, former President Donald Trump in striking distance to become the next president of the United States. In fact, here's where the road to 270 stands at this hour, 3:45 roughly Eastern here. You can see the former president. He picked up Pennsylvania a short time ago. He flipped that key blue wall state, all but sealing Vice President Harris's fate. You can also see President Trump picking up North Carolina as well, which surprised a handful of folks maybe. But again, that blue wall, we're talking about Wisconsin, we're talking about Michigan, we're talking about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's gone. Michigan still outstanding. Wisconsin also still outstanding. And we don't expect to get anything from Nevada or Arizona for some time.
And while we have not made a projection of who is the next president of the United States, it's worth saying that on that map, there is really not a path at this point for Vice President Harris to come out on top. It really is Trump's. This election obviously dramatically changes things for both parties. And with that, we want to bring in some of our political insiders to talk about it. Sarah Fagan's a Republican strategist and former White House political director for President George W. Bush. Stephen Hayes is an NBC News political analyst and editor of The Dispatch. And we have Jeh Johnson, former U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security. Welcome to you all, and thanks for being with us. Sarah, I'll start with you as a Republican strategist. We've been chewing this over. We've been talking about what it was that President Trump did to get to where we are right now. There's been a lot of reporting that maybe he didn't always listen to his campaign chiefs, and he just sort of, you know, we saw him off the cuff, off teleprompter a lot over the last couple of weeks, especially. What do you think he did to get all those people to turn out?
Well, I think, you know, his off-the-cuff nature is what many of his supporters like about him. They find him authentic. They find him unscripted. They find that refreshing. But I don't think this was about what Donald Trump did. I think this is about what the Democrats did while in office over the last 4 years. You know, you look at inflation, which was so high during much of this administration, and many people are still feeling the pain of that as they dig out of credit card debt and high housing costs. So I think more than anything else, this is probably more a reflection of where the country has been the last few years. And it may not have mattered who the presidential nominee was because of the overarching economic factors, global factors facing the country.
The reality, though, is, Mr. Secretary, again, housing notwithstanding, a lot of the economic metrics, if you look at them objectively in this country, wages are up, unemployment down. Again, it doesn't seem to have translated for Democrats. But it seemed to me that Vice President Harris, and this, she was in trouble a few weeks ago when we heard former President Barack Obama explicitly almost pleading with black men specifically to get out and vote. And again, we're still pouring over some of the exit polling data. But it doesn't look like that happened. It doesn't look like men specifically turned out for the vice president. Why do you think her message didn't resonate as well with that particular group?
I actually think we have to reassess how we look at demographics in politics. For generations, the black vote was a block vote. The Democrat, every 4 years, would get 90% of the black vote.
Yeah.
And then we tended to look at other demographic groups in the same way,
Yeah.
as if there's a so-called Latino vote. I don't believe there's a Latino vote. And it looks as though this election, Donald Trump will have received somewhere between 40 and 45% of the Latino vote. I believe that as African Americans, as Latinos become further integrated into our society, they're also further integrated into everyday American thinking about the economy, about inflation, about schools, about any number of things, such that an unconventional candidate like Trump can come along and peel off certain types of voters that we would traditionally think belong to one party or another. And so I think we need to reassess entirely how we view various different voting blocks and talk to Latinos, talk to blacks, as if they're everyday Americans, as opposed to a group being concerned only about specific issues.
That's a great point.
Well, and Stephen, I see you nodding along a little bit. Do you think fundamentally what Mr. Trump was able to do was appeal to a wide swath of maybe slightly lower income or people who are struggling in this economy?
Yeah, I think that's right. And if it's true that there are many economic indicators that are pointed in the right direction, but it doesn't erase the fact that your ground beef is 30% more than it was at the beginning of the Biden administration. That matters for a lot of people, and it matters more for people at the lower end of the income scale than anything else. But there's one other point I think it's really important to make here. There was a 25-day period between June 27th, when Joe Biden had his disastrous debate performance, and July 25th, or whatever it was, that he dropped out, 21st, when he dropped out. For 3 weeks plus, you had Kamala Harris and others at the top of the Democratic Party telling the country that what they had just seen in that debate performance, they hadn't just seen. There were 3 weeks when basically they were lying to the American public. And I think the American public looked at this and said, if they're not being straight with us on this, what else aren't they telling us the truth about? And I think that did irreparable damage to her candidacy, because she had been at his side for the entirety of the administration.
All right, insiders stand by. By stand by, I mean chug your coffee. We want to come back to you in just a moment. We're talking about some of the domestic implications here, but this is an election, of course, that is going to have global effects as well. NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now with some international reaction to this presidential election. Keir, with two major wars right now happening overseas, Ukraine, obviously Gaza as well, the eyes of the world on the outcome of tonight's election and what changes may come. What has been the reaction so far?
So, Craig, this is sending shockwaves around the world. Shockwaves, though, of enthusiasm and concern, depending on where you are. So, diplomats not authorized to speak on the record here in the Gulf region, using words like wow and stunning when they've spoken to us this morning. It's the middle of the day here now in the UAE, when they have spoken to us through the night as they watch the results. I just want to read you, Craig, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel's comments. Congratulations on history's greatest comeback, calling it a historic return, addressing his comments on X to Donald and Melania Trump. An Iranian spokesman saying U.S. elections do not concern us and will not affect Iran's livelihoods. So a very different perspective there from Iran, of course. And local television here reporting that Hamas is saying that the president, who we think will be the president, of course, Donald Trump, will now be tested. His pledge for peace in the region will be tested. And then let's just track over to Russia and Ukraine. President Zelensky of Ukraine saying congratulations, before crucially adding, I appreciate President Trump's commitment to the peace through strength. So trying already to advocate that Donald Trump will support Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry spokesman, Craig, saying hallelujah. And we've been speaking to Russian officials, also not authorized to speak on the record. One telling us less predictability is incoming. Another saying there is a chance for a truce or at least some kind of change. Craig.
Our Chief International Correspondent, Keir Simmons, for us there with that international reaction. Keir, thank you.
Fascinating. It's already well into daytime over there, right, in many parts of the world. We have much more to get to. Early morning, our time here in the U.S., our special coverage of 2024 continues after this. What's the message that you're trying to get out to young people?
Know what is in the drug supply.
We've got important news this hour about your money.
Mental health, big picture, why is it so tough right now?
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
And welcome back to our continuing coverage of this 2024 election. Craig Melvin alongside Kate Snow. I want to spend a moment or two here talking about an issue that was supposed to be quite galvanizing in a number of states. Abortion on the ballot in 10 states, but a measure in Florida that would have expanded abortion access failed to clear the 60% threshold that it needed to pass. Meanwhile, abortion initiatives passed in Arizona, Colorado, Maryland as well, with more results in other states to come. So how much of a motivating factor was abortion access when it came to getting voters to the polls? Was it the singular issue that Democrats hoped it would be? Kelly O'Donnell, at this point, again, we're still poring over the numbers, but in a lot of states, it doesn't seem as if it was.
Which is a surprise, because when we were on the road covering the campaigns, talking to voters, we so often heard that. We also saw how many of the people who were endorsing, whether they be celebrities or ordinary Americans who had a personal story of health care related to abortion rights that had come forward, how powerful so many of those stories were. It seemed like it was an issue that would drive many women voters. But again, the larger piece of this is we've seen how young men and men in general were also very deeply motivated to go toward President Trump. So it'll be a question.
But what's interesting, Kelly, is that people actually were galvanized to vote on this particular issue, right? I mean, of all of the mandates that we saw on the ballot today, all of them got more than 50% of the vote, right? But that didn't translate to Democratic votes. There was clearly a message sent by the voters in all of these states that they wanted to enshrine reproductive rights on some level. Right. But that didn't guarantee that they were also going to vote for the Democrat as well.
Or that they thought that Kamala Harris would be able to restore it nationally.
Exactly.
So you sort of have to assume that some people went into the booth and voted for one of those abortion rights propositions and at the same time voted for President Trump.
They had to have, right? Because, I mean, he won Florida handily, even though the measure didn't pass in Florida because it needed a supermajority of 60%, it still got well over the 50% threshold. Yeah. So there had to have been people that voted for that measure and also voted for Donald Trump.
He successfully muddied his message.
Yes.
Now, he didn't necessarily do it for the party, but he did it for himself.
Don't go anywhere. Special live coverage of the election continues.
News lives in the now.
Look at this. You can't even see anything anymore.
Let's break down what we know.
You gotta see this.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
Mornings are full of possibility and energy, and how you get set for the day ahead matters. It's about getting caught up and getting ahead, because every day deserves the best start.
From NBC News, this is Decision 2024. Here are Craig Melvin and Kate Snow.
Good morning. It is 4 a.m. on the East Coast, 1 a.m. on the West Coast right now on what can only be described as an historic election night as Donald Trump is headed to a return to the White House. The former president speaking to supporters at his election headquarters at Mar-a-Lago, Florida tonight, vowing to help the country heal.
And every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day, I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
Our decision desk at NBC News has not yet called the presidency for Donald Trump, but realistically, Kamala Harris has no viable path left. Let's take a look at where things stand in the battleground states. We'll start with Pennsylvania. This was our most recent projection just in the last couple hours. Pennsylvania, with its 19 electoral votes, the biggest of the battleground states, the projected winner, Donald Trump. Let's move to Georgia. We called this earlier in the evening. Donald Trump, the projected winner there with 99% of the vote in. In North Carolina, Mr. Trump winning there as well. 97% of the vote in, 51% to about 48%. In Michigan, we have not yet made a projection. Michigan, characterizing that as too close to call at this hour, with 86% of the vote there in. Wisconsin, also too close to call, with 96% of the vote in. And let's take a look at Nevada out west. That one also too close to call. 93% of the vote in. May take a long time for Nevada and Arizona to count the votes. Arizona also not too close, but too early to call, meaning we just don't have enough information yet to call that race.
Well, here's where the race to 270 stands right now. As you can see, there is a lot of red on that map. Former President Trump at 266 electoral votes. Vice President Harris right now at 219 electoral votes. We can also tell you at this hour, Republicans projected to retake control of the Senate as well. There are still a couple of races that are outstanding that we haven't called just yet, but we have called West Virginia for Jim Justice there. The House at this hour, again, can't call it just yet. 63 races still uncalled. But as you can see, Republicans there have picked up 3 seats in the lower chamber. And a very good morning to you. I was going to say good evening.
Good morning.
It was evening a long time ago. Craig Melvin alongside Kate Snow here. And again, the big story, Donald Trump poised for a historic political comeback.
Let's get right to Chuck Todd, who's been here all night long, watching all the numbers come in. Where are you focusing now?
Well, look, I mean, there's 2 things I'm looking at. One is how close are we to calling Wisconsin?
Yeah.
And I'm going to go over there and show you that.
Which would put Trump over.
Which would put him officially over the 270 mark. And I'll show you what we're waiting on here and why we haven't called it, because there is technically enough vote out there to get him there in Milwaukee. As you can see, it is 107,000. As we could tell you, we think, she has to win like 95% of remaining vote, okay? But it's not it doesn't yet meet the standards for us to call. We think we're going to have a better read on Milwaukee County, which is really what we're waiting on. And when we get a better read, we will feel better about being to characterize this race. But that right now, I think, is of all the potential official paths to get him there, this is one. But the bigger thing, the bigger thing is not the bigger thing. The presidency is the bigger thing. The other thing I'm watching tonight in these same blue wall states are the 3 Senate seats. Yeah. Because what is interesting is all of them, part of it is a lot of Donald Trump voters go into the polls, vote Donald Trump and leave. And there's about a missing 50,000 to 100,000 votes for all of these Republican Senate candidates in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And that's where the surge of vote in Milwaukee for Tammy Baldwin, or Detroit for Alyssa Slotkin, or even Philadelphia for Bob Casey, there is enough vote for them to win there. And I think 2 of those 3 are going to be very, very close. And I have a feeling those 3 Senate races those may take a couple of days for us to call. They're maybe so close it could be recounts.
What's happening in Michigan, Chuck?
Well, Michigan, and I'll just show you here. Let me move over here since it's right next door. We just don't have any. Look at Wayne County. We only have 54%. It's obviously the single most important large county there to find out. I mean, there's just a ton of remaining vote. We have nearly 500,000 vote left here. So it's just way too early. There were some slowdowns. Just Michigan, this is just not going to get called tonight, this morning.
I'm looking at a note from our reporters there. The Detroit city clerk had been saying that they were going to have all this wrapped up by 11 p.m. Eastern time for Detroit, Wayne County, and it's held up.
Right. And then for whatever reason, we've had a lot of problems getting data from the various counties. It's just not. So Michigan's just going to take us a long time to get settled. I will want to take you to Alaska, because that is...
Take us to Alaska, Chuck.
That is also a state that will make him 1 electoral vote short. We're waiting on Maine, because Maine 2. But as you can see here, he's got a lead. 70% of the vote is in. It's... let's see how much raw vote is there. 40,000. So, she would have to make up 40,000 votes. She would have to win 60+% of what's remaining. Unlikely, but we are waiting for a little bit more data there. So that would get him 1 electoral vote short. And of course, as I showed you before, Maine's 2nd congressional district is one that we do expect him to carry. That would give him the 270 as well.
Chuck, come back and join us here at the desk. Also want to bring in Ryan Nobles, Kelly O'Donnell. They'll be with us for the rest of these early morning hours as well. I mean, again, these results dramatically change the landscape for Democrats especially, and Republicans as well. What can we glean from the first Trump administration when we look at what a second administration might look like, just in terms of the folks that he surrounds himself with, the makeup of leadership in the House and the Senate as well?
One thing that I'm struck by, because now we're into the window of talking about the transition, which is one of the more bureaucratic, nerdy things. But he really...
Nerd out, Kelly.
Yes, he really had no interest in that when he won the first time. And yet again, he would need to deal with a transition with the Biden administration. It's being led on President Biden's side by his chief of staff, Jeff Zients. That is incredibly important. An incoming president hires 4,000 federal workers, has to put together a whole team, has to get all of the information, the handoff. On the campaign trail, we heard how Barack Obama had said he had prepared a pandemic guide for any future president, and that got tossed in the trash in the transition. Will he approach it differently now? He knows what the office is. He knows he will have strength in numbers on Capitol Hill. Will he approach it differently? Another thing that strikes me as different is when he came in the first time, he had a lot of the existing apparatus of the Republican National Committee. Reince Priebus became his chief of staff. He was the chairman. He had some of the people who were kind of willing to step in for the good of the country. who were not allies of Donald Trump. Many of them, of course, in the time during this campaign said
People with
they don't.
experience.
Yes, experience, knowledge, and that many of them say he should not have been voted in a second time. So who will he surround himself in those key positions? All of that will be critical.
Yeah. You guys are going to have a lot of fun, though, because there's a bunch of U.S. senators that are on some short lists. I mean, I'm already hearing Marco Rubio to state, Tom Cotton to defense. Not saying so. All of a sudden, we could have some new senators.
Yep,
Bill Hagerty is another one, all from states with Republican governors, so they wouldn't cost themselves Senate seats. But I definitely think you will see people who are on that short list for VP, Doug Burgum as well, and Marco Rubio probably both end up in this cabinet.
And the other big difference between this incoming Trump administration versus the last one, to Kelly's point, he didn't really know anybody in the political sphere. He didn't have relationships with these people that he appointed to extremely important positions, like Secretary of State. He had never even met Rex Tillerson before they went through that vetting process. This time around, he's going to know every single person that he puts in those seats.
Rex Tillerson, who he later fired.
Exactly, who fired. And
quote marks.
Yeah, exactly. Jim Mattis, John Kelly, these are people he didn't know. He's going to know and have relationships with each one of these people that he appoints this time around. And these are all people where his first question is going to be, how loyal are you to me personally? Because this is my administration.
Such an important
I have a mandate. I won the popular vote. He thinks he's going to win the popular vote. I won more than 300 electoral votes. What are you going to do for me if you are in this position? And so the theory of this case would be that it would be far less tumultuous than the first Trump administration, because this time around he's picking his people. Whether or not that's borne out by facts and what happens,
countless times in the first administration, we covered people putting up guardrails, telling him, no, that's not lawful, you can't do that. If he does not have people willing to say that, that will certainly change the tone and tenor. I'm also struck by, just in seeing on social media, someone like Jeb Bush, who once ran against him, congratulated him tonight, as well as leaders from around the world.
I mean, Nikki Haley. We saw Nikki Haley's op-ed a few days ago. It's going to be interesting.
And it might not just be people that don't put up guardrails for him. It may be people that encourage him to go further than what his instincts even tell him.
A more expansive view.
Right, the Project 2025.
I'll put something, I mean, it's funny. Democrats were the ones talking about getting rid of the filibuster. Republicans at 55, 56, I promise you, a lot of conservative activists are going to pressure President Trump to say, hey, we can't get our policies through, especially if he gets the House. Right.
Because you need 60 votes for people that don't know what the filibuster is.
60
you need
votes.
60 votes in a lot of cases to pass something.
So if the Republicans have the House, if they can hold the House, I mean, talk about your irony of ironies here. This is a different Republican Senate. Mitch McConnell is just another member for 2 more years.
And that's the distinction between winning 55 seats versus 52 seats.
Right.
Because you've got Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins that
would have stopped that, but they might not have
They may not have the power to do that.
Right.
I want to check in with NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. He spent the night, and it's now the morning, at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Vaughn's also been covering the Trump campaign for months and months and months. Vaughn, maybe pick up on what we were just talking about. I know the president has said, former President Trump has said, he's talked about a lot of things that he wants to do on day one, things that he wants to do right away. Some of that's going to need congressional approval, but what could he really start doing after the transition, the first day in office?
The first day in office, let's just take tariffs. Donald Trump, right? He started a trade war in 2018, 2019, putting tariffs on a great amount of goods from Mexico, Canada, Europe, but also large tariffs on Chinese goods coming to the United States. And what happened as a result were retaliatory tariffs that were placed on U.S. goods that were produced here, like corn, soybeans, but also other manufactured goods that go overseas. And it was those countries that placed tariffs on those goods. In some of the U.S. export markets, they closed up. And it was domestic producers that saw some of their markets, the tanks, so the price of corn, just as an example. And that's where Donald Trump, this go-around, he is promising to place 20 to 30% tariffs on all goods coming into the United States and 60% tariffs on all Chinese goods. And now this gets weedsy when we're talking about tariffs here, but there's a lot of top economists who have expressed concern about what the harbinger of that would be on U.S. producers. And now the likes of Donald Trump and people like Howard Lutnick, who is helping lead Donald Trump's transition team, have made the case that this is ultimately going to increase U.S. manufacturing, steel manufacturing, automobile manufacturing here at home. And Donald Trump has campaigned exactly on this. And he doesn't need congressional approval to do this. And so there could be far-reaching economic consequences. Donald Trump suggests that in the long run they'll be good. But folks in the immediate could very well, like in 2018, 2019, feel some of those immediate impacts. And Donald Trump doesn't need congressional approval for that.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard for us there at West Palm at Trump headquarters. Vaughn, stand by. We do want to come back to you in just a few moments.
Yeah, let's talk about one other issue tonight that our NBC News exit polls are showing. A huge shift in the youth vote, in the younger vote, especially young men turning out for former President Trump, a key demographic, obviously, that he had hoped would show up. And it looks like so far, based on exit polling, they did. We want to bring in an NBC News correspondent, Savannah Sellers. Savannah's at the desk with us now. Good to see you. Welcome to the morning shift. What are we seeing? Because it's not just young men, it's also young women, right?
To
some
an extent, yes. To an extent, yes.
More so young men.
It is those young men. We did see in exit polling also that abortion still was that motivating issue for young women, but young men and the way that they came out for Trump just sort of seems to have taken that over completely. He made really significant gains with young voters in crucial blue wall states. We saw him actually, according to our NBC News exit polls, he's ahead right now in the youth vote in Michigan. It can't be overstated that that's a big deal, that he actually won that in that state, nearly tied in Wisconsin, nearly tied in North Carolina. So you see these places where he definitely made those steps. If we want to talk about how he did that, right? I mean, just in my reporting, I actually kind of started noticing this about a week or so ago, a shift that I was seeing on college campuses where students started to tell me who were Republicans. I think there's more Trump support here than I had thought, because it's kind of starting to be on my Snapchat. It's starting to be on my TikTok. Right. Yeah. I'm hearing people feel more comfortable saying, I'm supporting the former president. The former president also had a really targeted strategy when it came to sort of going after these voters in these untraditional spaces. Podcasts, yeah. Fraternities, yeah. Sports, these cultish personalities making those choices for those podcasts, like a Logan Paul, like a Joe Rogan. By the way, his son, Barron Trump, was essentially his unofficial podcast advisor, saying, this is what I think you should go on, Dad. I'm a first-time voter. I'm a college student. This is what I'm listening to. And he actually reached those viewers there.
I had a number of my friends talk about the betting lines, just following the betting lines.
Like, Roddy Schwartz, who was in Arizona, who was on the campus of ASU tonight, he called me and he said, on camera, the last 3 people that I spoke to said to me, I don't care what the polls say. I didn't look at the polls. I looked at the odds.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And by the way, I know it sounds weird to us, perhaps. There's an entire generation of a voter who lives that way.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's FanDuel, every weekend, that's what they're doing. That's what they're following.
Even in high school, by the way.
Yeah.
Can I just note, my parents live in State College, Pennsylvania, Center County, Pennsylvania.
Center County, yeah.
If you bring it up, it's red for Trump. He held an event, not last weekend, but the weekend before, in that college town on the Penn State campus, which people there were like, what is he doing? This county is typically blue. It's been blue for a long time, not by a lot, but blue. But it's red today. And Chuck, I don't know. I wonder what that says about Penn State students potentially coming out.
Look, you and I both have, I think, Gen Z kids.
Yes.
And I have them in each gender.
19 and 21.
Yeah, I've got 17 and 20. And I have seen it. And, it was interesting. I got an anecdote from my voter who early on said, yeah, I've got a friend who's a Trump supporter. He tried to go vote, but he wasn't registered. And so that was sort of just one anecdote. Turned out that's just one anecdote. But a lot of these places, you have same-day voter registration.
Yeah.
Take Michigan. That's a same-day voter registration state. So if that means a whole bunch of people showed up, the assumption was, it's so funny. Last week, particularly was House Democrats, they were really pointing to college campuses as the key to them picking up a few of these key congressional races, particularly Ann Arbor and Iowa City, because they said, hey, in 2020, the Ann Arbor kids weren't in Michigan. They were voting in their home states. The Iowa City kids weren't in Iowa, weren't at the University of Iowa. They were voting from their home states. And so they thought, hey, when they're here, it's going to do it. Right. But, you know, they're not flipping that Iowa CD that they were hoping to flip, that Iowa City's in. And Michigan right now, we've still got a long way to go. But if they're breaking more like the rest of the country.
Yeah. Right. I was keeping a close eye on North Carolina over the last day because college Democrats, they had intense organization on college campuses. They lobbied the state to get more polling places on campus. They made student IDs an acceptable form of ID on many campuses. But they were also doing something interesting, and the Harris campaign was involved in this, was paying volunteers to do this. Anyone who registered to vote with them or who signed out what they were calling a commit to vote card, they were sending them directly Google Calendar invitations with their closest polling location. And they actually told me, we think we did that with a fair amount of Republicans also. Like, it was sort of a bipartisan get out the vote effort. We saw that this is one of those states where that youth vote is nearly tied as North Carolina.
And by the way, North Carolina, you start the RTP area, Research Triangle Park, Raleigh, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, you got a whole heck of a lot of college kids there.
But remember, they've only known Trump. I was doing a little stint at the University of Chicago last week and was meeting with these students, and first, like, you know, my first memory of an election was 2016, and I was 12. The students, I was like, and it was just a reminder. They don't know anything other than Trump.
And their whole lives. He was a celebrity.
That's right.
His show on this network, The Apprentice, came on 20 years ago.
I'll take a quick break here because even at 4:20 in the morning, we have bills to pay here. Our special coverage of the 2024
We're getting big numbers here, Craig.
Election continues. Ballots still being counted, especially in Wayne County, Michigan, Wisconsin as well. Those two states still uncalled, but former President Donald Trump on the verge of returning to the White House for a second term. A closer look at how this all played out and what happens next. We'll do that right after this.
Pledge not to hold a vote on any legislation that would ban abortion? Do you still have faith and confidence in the Supreme Court? Is this plan to ban price gouging anything more than a gimmick? If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Welcome back. Our NBC News exit polls giving us a glimpse into this historic election and what factors drove voters out to the polls. This exit poll showing us how voters are feeling about the way things are going in the U.S. You see 73% to get their take on all of this. We've got Matt Gorman, former senior communications advisor for the Tim Scott presidential campaign, and Jeff Flake, former Republican senator from Arizona, here with us. I guess I'd just like to start, because we haven't seen you yet at this early hour, with your thoughts on this. I'll start with you, Matt. Their thoughts on this election.
One thing I was surprised about, one thing I wasn't surprised about. First, I was surprised at the speed of which all of this was called. Pennsylvania, it being 4 in the morning and it being
We thought it might take days.
Absolutely. We thought it would be waking up into Wednesday. One thing I was not surprised about, and I think people discounted, they were saying, like, what if Wisconsin goes this way and Georgia goes that way? I think we underestimated the chance that this all falls in the same way. These, if you remember, these states aren't vacuums. Yeah. They kind of tend to follow the same trends. We're certainly seeing that tonight.
To you, same question.
Shocked at the margins. I mean, Illinois, 5-point margin.
Yeah, Chuck was just talking about that.
New Jersey,
yeah,
that's just shocking.
And by the way, Michigan and Wisconsin poised to be pretty doggone close as well.
Yeah.
Senator, you also have a unique vantage point. You're also an ambassador as well. We all remember what the first Trump term looked like, what it sounded like. Is there any universe in which this second Trump administration looks and sounds different?
I think it'll be different. One, he knows, I mean, he knows more people. People from whom he'll select, ambassadors, Secretary of State, and others as well. And so, and I think there's a good cadre of people, you know, in the Senate who are waiting for those opportunities. So I think that's going to be different in that way. So he has much more familiarity with how Washington works, and I hope that that leads to a smoother time as well. I know that our allies want that, certainly.
We just checked in with Keir Simmons, who's overseas for us in the Middle East, and he was, you know, statement after statement from world leaders, like the Russian leader, saying, you know, I can't remember the exact words, but congratulations. It's definitely being seen around the world at this hour.
Absolutely, and I think to Senator Flake's point, you know, this was a marriage of convenience in late 2016, early 2017. They were just trying to assemble a team. Now, they've been dating for about 10 years now. They know each other pretty well. So their folks are ready to assume these positions. As you talked about earlier, you know, Senator Rubio, Senator Haggerty, and others.
Senator Scott.
We'll see. You know, I think I could see him staying on in Congress and doing some things there, but wouldn't discount it. There are people who Trump knows, Trump trusts, and has a relationship with. It might make that transition and then governing a little easier.
And these senators have relationships overseas as well. With some of these heads of state, and that helps. It certainly does.
We just have about a minute left. I'm a little surprised by your tone. I would have thought you might have been concerned.
Well, there's always concern. It's a tough world out there. We have enemies, we have allies, and I hope that we can always distinguish the difference. And so, yeah, there's concern. But, I mean, there are a lot of upsides as well. I can tell you one advantage. President Trump has the ability to just and the inclination to just pick up the phone sometimes. Now, sometimes you wish you'd have a note taker, you know, and make sure that that he's not promising things we can't deliver. But that instinct is good to call world leaders and say thanks for this, thanks for that. So,
Senator, thank you, Matt. Thank you. Don't go far. Don't go far. Our live special election coverage continues. Former President Trump bursting through the blue wall, taking Pennsylvania. So what happened?
Kristen Welker hosts Meet the Press every Sunday on NBC.
Welcome back. The economy was definitely one of the top issues for voters heading into the election. So we want to bring in NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung, covers the economy for us. Brian, what are you watching right now? Also wondering how the markets are reacting worldwide to what we're seeing.
Yeah, good morning, guys. I've been in my data den over here, but actually I want to show you some stats about some of the local economies. some of the states here, namely Georgia and also North Carolina. So if you take a look at Georgia, take a look at the unemployment rate. Again, what you're looking at on the black boxes over there is the national figure. So the unemployment rate actually a little bit better in Georgia than the national average at 3.6% compared to 4.1%. Wage growth was a little bit lower in Georgia compared to the national. Again, 20% over the last 4 years, 18% in Georgia. By the way, in Georgia, that did not keep up with the rate of inflation, worth noting as well. But take a look at the change in home value, where homes in Georgia were going up by a lot more than the national average over the last 4-year period. This is a really interesting story when you think about that mixed picture. Again, in North Carolina, though, it's a little clearer in terms of the economy looking broadly better. Take a look at the unemployment rate, 3.8% compared to 4.1%. Wage growth even better over that 4-year period, 23% compared to 20%. And then the change in home value, 46% over 37%. I bring this up because of Trump's strength in these two states, right? Having won these two battleground states, despite the fact that the economy in those states, in some respects, and in North Carolina, in all of these respects that I'm showing you, was actually better than the national average. So the narrative that the Trump administration was able to basically put out there, despite the fact that the picture, at least on an aggregate level, looked better, was certainly something worth messaging. And one other point I want to bring up, too, is that the Biden investments, right, when you think about the Inflation Reduction Act, they were trying to drop a lot of money specifically in the EV space. It didn't work out in those counties, which I tell you went heavily more towards Trump than they did for Harris in this particular election, guys.
All right, really interesting. Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate you being here in the wee hours with us. Don't go anywhere. We're not going anywhere. Our special live coverage of the election continues right after this.
From inside Iran, from Israel, from Tampa, Hurricane Milton is here. Where we're standing right now is covered in water. Part of our continued reporting. Thanks for talking to me. Appreciate you.
Do you pledge not to hold a vote on any legislation that would ban abortion? Do you still have faith and confidence in the Supreme Court? Is this plan to ban price gouging anything more than a gimmick? If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
And a good morning to 4:30 a.m. on the East Coast. That means it is 1:30 a.m. on the West Coast. The big story right now, Donald Trump on the verge of 270 electoral votes. Once again, the former president speaking to his supporters at his election headquarters at Mar-a-Lago just a short time ago, telling the crowd they made history tonight.
We made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
And the former president there sounding a bit surprised. To be clear, the NBC decision desk has not yet called the presidency for Donald Trump, but important to note that Kamala Harris essentially has no viable path to victory left. Let's take a look at where things stand right now in the battleground states. We will start with what was perhaps the most important battleground for both candidates, Pennsylvania. It's 19 electoral votes. Former President Trump, the projected winner there in the Keystone State with 96% of the vote there already being counted. Down to Georgia. Georgia, President Trump, the projected winner in Georgia as well, just over 50% there. From Georgia, we go to the Tar Heel State, North Carolina. Former President Trump also the projected winner in North Carolina. That battleground he's picking up. In Michigan, though, it is still too close to call in Michigan. As you can see, the former president is ahead by about 4 percentage points, though, but too close to call in Michigan. And in Wisconsin, it is also too close to call at this hour. But as you can see, once again, former President Trump with a slight lead over the vice president. Out west in Nevada, it is too close to call there. And in Arizona, it is too early to call in Arizona. But again, as we've been talking about here, Kate, the path to 270, an uphill slog, if not impossible, for Vice President Harris.
That's right. You see a lot of red on that map, and we're waiting for two key battleground states right now, for Michigan and Wisconsin, to get more data there. Arizona, New Mexico may take longer. Let's take a look at the Senate, the balance of power right now. This is the other big headline tonight, this morning. 51 Republicans now in the Senate. That gives Republicans control of the Senate. You remember Democrats had control before this evening. Now it is a Senate controlled by Republicans. And in the House, it's still early. We still have 62 uncalled races, but right now, Republicans have gained a net of 3 seats in the House. We're watching to see whether Republicans continue to hold the majority and have the speakership, or whether Democrats might take control of the House.
And a very good early morning to you on this election night. Craig Melvin alongside Kate Snow. We're saying good morning to you. There's a very good chance some of you never went to sleep. So for all of you who've been up all night, thanks for staying up with us.
Good chance we didn't go to sleep either.
It's true. And it's not just us, of course. We've got NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. We've got him here with us, as well as Ryan Nobles and Kelly O'Donnell as
I
well.
might have nodded off a little here.
How did you do that? There was just...
I took a little power nap.
The adrenaline, all of that, I can't do it.
I want to dig into, I mean, there have been a number of surprises tonight. One of the big surprises, the Latino vote. The Latino voters seem to have really propelled the former president over the top. Can we break that down at all at the big board? Can we dig into the Latino vote?
We can. I want to show you. I'm going to go to Texas because it's actually the cleanest place to show this, but I do want to, our pollsters put together some analysis here. The number of states where she lost ground among Latinos by 21 points in the state of Pennsylvania, 8 points in the state of Arizona. Compared to 4 years ago. It was 8 points in the state of Arizona.
Didn't materialize then.
15 points in Texas, 24 points in North Carolina. It's just right down the line. Another 11 points in Florida, just across the board. But I'll take you to Texas here, because South Texas, we got a county here that has voted Democratic since the 19th century, that is going to go Republican for the first time. I think I have it down here. I think it's Starr County right here. This is probably the best example. It looks like it's going to hold. But again, this is Biden carried it by 5 points. Just give you, Hillary Clinton carried it by over 60 points, okay? Wow. This is how fast South Texas, this is just one county right on the border. This is Starr County. Again, the last time it's been since the 19th century that the Democrats have carried this county every single time. And I can just go here, I'll show you. Well, let me take you to other counties here so you can see. Oop, didn't mean to do that. Let me get you back down to Texas.
Chuck, can we see in that county the Latino vote? Is that possible?
Well, it's mostly, these are majority Latino counties.
Counties, right.
So just to tell you, so here's another one here. So you could see just the change in over 2 cycles. Again, Clinton carries this county by 37 points. Biden carries the county by 12. Trump carries it by 3. So this has just been a fast transformation all along the southern border. So you got to say to yourself, Latino voters in particular seem to respond to the border issue. And when you see border, again, this is now as Republican as South Texas has ever been. And this used to be the heart and soul. Part of the problem now that Democrats can't target Texas, they always thought, well, South Texas was going to be, you take South Texas and couple it with Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio and Austin, and they thought that was the math to make them competitive statewide. The problem is they're losing South Texas, and they're losing it, as you can see, by gigantic numbers. The swing is just gigantic down there. And again, that's Texas. We've seen it. I told you, every single swing state. We've seen it across the board, and these are some major ones. And I see we've got somebody here who knows a lot about what's going on in the state of Texas, but he probably knows Starr County really well. I mean, that's the
former GOP congressman from Florida, also staying up very late. Apparently, no one's turned on the lights there in that studio for you. We do have lights here, though, for Secretary Julian Castro, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary in the Obama administration. Secretary, I'll start with you. I heard something interesting last hour from your former colleague, Secretary Jay Johnson, a former Secretary of Homeland Security. He said something that stayed with me. This idea that we continue to treat minority groups, especially in this country, as monolithic. This idea that there is a Latino voter or a black voter or a woman voter, when apparently, based on what we've seen tonight, couldn't be farther from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, what I see tonight basically is, well, first of all, something happened between 2016 and 2020, because the first significant drop-off that we saw, especially in places like South Texas, was not this year, but in 2020. And so the Democratic Party is going to have to basically do the inverse of what the Republican Party did in 2012, which is an autopsy to try and figure out what happened there. But I think to a large extent, what you're starting to see is that the Latino community, other communities are dividing or cleaving along the ways that every other community is, urban versus rural, education level, and so forth. And especially when you compare, I'm looking forward to comparing, for instance, what happened in South Texas or other rural communities, small town communities with Latinos versus in the big cities. I bet that you're going to find that the drop-off was especially pronounced in those smaller communities versus big urban areas, for instance.
What's puzzling maybe, too, is that President Trump ran on a platform of a mass deportation of immigrants. So you sort of wonder if some of those who voted for him in those southern Texas counties are maybe second, third generation. They've been here a long time.
I think that's part of it. Also, if you compare the focus of the immigration debate of the last couple of years versus the 2010, 2012, 2014 DACA and DAPA timeframe, the focus of the last couple of years was almost exclusively on people who were literally just getting here. And so I think that there was a division that was created there that was very different from when the people that were targeted many years ago by Prop 187 or, you know, SB 1070 in Arizona, or the DACA conversation was around, were people who had been here for a long time, who had roots, who were part of their neighborhoods and their communities. That
Latino vote and the Hispanic vote. I want to ask you a very simple question about the results tonight. Again, we haven't called the election, but I think we all can acknowledge where this thing is headed. Did Donald Trump win this race, or did Kamala Harris lose this race? Win this race, or did Kamala Harris lose this race?
Look, I think Donald Trump won this race, and in part, it's because the Biden-Harris administration failed to unite the country, Craig. What people wanted from Joe Biden in 2020, what they were looking for at that time was to turn the page, to bring the country together, to have a healer in the White House. That is what Joe Biden promised to do. When we look at how people feel about the country, that right track, wrong track question in polling, it's obvious that he failed. And I really think that's what opened the door to the second Trump presidency. Now, when it comes to the Latino vote, look, I think we can confidently declare tonight, Craig, that this idea that demography is destiny, right? What Democrats have been saying for over a decade, that as the American population would diversify, that meant that the Democratic Party would automatically grow. That is obviously not true. It's pretty clear that Democrats were taking a lot of those voters for granted, and now a lot of those voters are turning around and supporting Republicans and Donald Trump. And then the second thing I would say is that what's really hurt Democrats with Latinos isn't so much a policy issue or any specific policies, but culture and the way that Democrats talk about this country. For a long time, Democrats have emphasized the country's flaws. The country has been described as a racist country, an oppressive country, and without question, this country is flawed. But I don't think the average Hispanic can relate to that description of America. Most Hispanic families feel very, very fortunate to be here, and they fled places that are far more flawed than our country.
Let me bring in Abraham Enriquez. Sorry to keep you waiting. You're the founder of Bienvenido US, which, as I understand it, you did a lot of work for President Trump on the ground level. You know, there were people before tonight saying that President Trump wasn't doing as much as Vice President Harris was, getting out the vote, door knocking. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah, so tonight is such a surreal moment for me because Tina had just graduated college, and I saw that there was a need to engage with young Hispanics. You have to understand that the average age of Hispanics in America, 29 years old, meaning we're the youngest racial demographic in the country, as well as 2/3 of Hispanics on the voter rolls are second and third generation. What does that mean? That means we're assimilating to American culture better. Most of us speak English as our first language, and a lot of us have a college degree. So this idea that we have to be spoken to about that the only issues that we care about is immigration reform, amnesty for all, just doesn't hit with 2/3 of Hispanics on the voter rolls. So when President Trump invited me to the White House to launch Bienvenido, I had 2 years of front row seat to see the policies that benefited our community, which is why in November of 2022, we were the first organization to endorse him. And this election cycle, we put in $3 million across 5 different battleground states to ensure that we were increasing that Hispanic vote. So tonight, being able to say that we delivered 45% of the Hispanic vote for President Trump is something that it doesn't surprise me because he has made himself available to the community. Yeah, it's important to have Hispanic celebrities endorse you, I guess. But what's more important is having President Trump visit a cafecito shop in Miami or a bodega in the Bronx or a tiendita in Las Vegas. So President Trump decided to really break down the coalition and provide himself as the biggest surrogate to the Hispanic community. And well, tonight we see that that paid off.
Curious, Abraham, are you hoping for any kind of role in the new administration?
I love Texas, and I do not see myself going to D.C. I think my biggest support is staying here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I want to come back to you, Secretary, for just a moment here, because as you have probably already seen, the Monday morning quarterbacking has already started in earnest on social media. You know, had Kamala Harris picked Josh Shapiro, would it have turned out differently? Had she spent more time focused on the mail vote and the waning days of the campaign, would it have turned out differently? For you, I would imagine it probably hits a little different because one of the things that I found striking in the last few weeks of the campaign, your former boss, Barack Obama, day in, day out, night in, night out, rally after rally, trying to pull Kamala Harris over the finish line, and he couldn't do it. No celebrity could do it. Beyonce, I mean, it was just Taylor Swift, Oprah, all of these celebrities who came out and were so vocal in their support of the vice president, they didn't move the needle. What does that tell you, if anything?
What it tells me is that it's something deeper than that. I don't think that any one thing, a different selection of a vice presidential candidate, a running mate, would have made that difference. I think that Kamala Harris was dealt a very difficult hand. Nobody else in history had to do a 100-day sprint to the finish. I think in many ways on inflation, on other issues, that the narrative was set. And probably it would have been a lot better chance of winning if President Biden had stepped aside sooner and there had been more opportunity to actually reset a new narrative. But we'll never know. These were very unusual circumstances. She was trying to do something unprecedented. And then, Craig, I think also at a bigger picture level, 15 years ago, before Barack Obama was elected, if somebody had said, you know what, we're going to ask the United States to elect a black woman president, most people would have said, what? Yeah. That's not going to happen for 30 or 40 years. And what breaks my heart is to think at a bigger level that it's beyond any of these sort of, you know, one-off issues that are happening right now, but it's still some of the ingrained challenges.
You can say the quiet part out loud.
No, I mean, that we face, you know, with racism among some people and misogyny among some people. I don't think we're grappling enough with some of those larger issues right now yet either.
All right, Secretary Castro, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and a big thanks as well to our other 2 insiders as well. We still have thank you both, gentlemen. We've got lots more to get to as we continue our special coverage of the 2024 election. Democrats relied heavily on the fight for abortion rights to drive voters to the polls in a lot of places, but did it turn out as they had hoped? We're going to take a look at that part of the story next.
Kristen Welker hosts Meet the Press every Sunday on NBC.
Welcome back. As a result of Roe v. Wade being overturned, abortion rights initiatives, as you know, made their way onto the ballot in 10 states on this election night. For a check on the results, we're going to go over to Ryan Nobles. He's at the data wall for us. Ryan?
Yeah, Kate, I think we're going to talk about this for quite a while after this election, about how abortion played a role in this particular vote, because there were a number of motivating factors that brought people to the polls as it relates to abortion, because there were so many of these referendums that were on the ballot. I want to show you a couple of them, in particular, the two places where they failed. This is the first time that we've seen measures like this actually fail at the statewide level. In Florida, a majority of the people of Florida did vote to protect abortion rights, but this needed a supermajority in order to get there. It fell short of that at only 57%. In South Dakota, a very conservative state, probably not that big of a surprise, this measure fails 61 to 39%. But let me show you a place where it passed that may come as a bit of surprise, and that's Montana, a very conservative state. Donald Trump won this state very easily. We're still waiting the results of the Montana Senate race right now, but it looks like Jon Tester is in a difficult position there, the incumbent. They still vote in favor of abortion rights. Now, look across the map, and you see all these different states where in each opportuna, which is essentially codifying an abortion ban. Now, there are exceptions in this for rape, incest, life of the mother, things along those lines after you get past the first trimester. But this is essentially codifying an abortion ban at 55 to 45%. Now, Democrats had really hoped that abortion would be a driving factor for their voters, and Kamala Harris made it kind of the central point of her campaign. But what we saw when you look at these results in many of these states, there was still people voting against the idea of abortion being banned, but not transferring that vote to Democrats, at least not in every single state, including some of the states where it mattered the most. Guys?
All right, you know, you look good over there at the data wall, but you look better over here at the desk. Come on home, Ryan. Kelly O'Donnell is still staying up with us. So let's pick up where Ryan left off there, Kelly-O, because what do you think happened in terms of that particular issue being a galvanizing issue for Democrats?
One thing is how Ryan laid it out, that if people are faced with a decision that is discreetly about abortion, and they have an opportunity to evaluate that and change the law in their state, they were motivated to do that. They weren't willing to confer that to leadership at a national level for Kamala Harris. Part of me wonders if so much of this is still baked in, the newness of her candidacy, how she was not as well known broadly. And to some degree, it is a mystery at this early hour because it was so dominant among so many of the voices.
So many ads.
So many. Yeah. And even in a lot of the polling talking about how important the issue was.
You know, it was interesting. We did a lot of focus groups leading up to this. There was one focus group where they asked this specific question of Pennsylvania voters. And you talk about a state like Pennsylvania, which had codified abortion rights there. And then you say in these focus groups, they actually asked, are you more concerned about abortion or the economy? Well, I'm more concerned about abortion. The second question, follow-up question in the focus group was, what if I told you that in your state, abortion is protected? You don't have to worry about that. Oh, well, now I'm worried about the economy. And so not worried about it at the national level if they felt protected in their own state. Yeah, and this is why I say this is going to be one of these things we're going to have to dissect after the fact. Because if you walked into that voting booth and you thought, oh, look, I have an opportunity here, independent of anything else, to protect abortion rights in my state, now I can vote on every other issue. And in some cases, they felt that
Harris
Donald
couldn't
Trump was better.
explain how she was going to get a national protection enacted.
Right.
Meanwhile, to make your point, Mike Rogers, who's the Republican nominee for Senate and right now is leading in Michigan, very late in the campaign. In fact, I thought it was too late to fix his problem on reproductive rights. Had his wife do a direct-to-camera, essentially saying, he is not going to do anything. You know, Michigan has already codified. You're okay. And he's not going to do anything to change Michigan's law.
Larry Hogan tried that in Maryland.
He did, right. Well, not a swing state, arguably. But it was interesting that they did it so late. In fact, I was like, wow, that's awfully late. It might be too late, sure, but it may not have been. We'll see.
Former President Trump, actually, I mean, he distanced himself from a lot of that. And of course, at one point, a few weeks ago,
I think that's the key.
Declaring himself the father of IVF.
No, I think him muddying his message gave the permission slip to somebody who was inclined to support Trump, but also is in favor of abortion rights. I mean, look, you can't win Florida by the margin he did. 57% supported this amendment.
Right.
It came up short because of the 60% threshold, but 57%. So that's quite a few Trump voters voting.
And when we talk about the influence that Donald Trump's going to have on this new government when he takes the presidency, you have to wonder, there are going to be a group of Republicans in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, who are going to want to push for a national abortion ban. Can Donald Trump prevent them from introducing that? Because I think that's going to be one of the big
He has never said, has he, Ryan? President Trump has never said.
Ryan, what's the line?
He would veto a
But what's the number? 15 weeks. Is it 15 weeks?
Right.
Because if it's 15 weeks, is that going to be considered a ban? Or is that going to be considered to Floridians and Texans who are dealing with 6-week bans and Iowans an improvement?
Right.
Just something to think about.
That was the question Hallie Jackson asked Kamala Harris, if you remember.
She wouldn't touch it.
And she would not touch it because the Overton window, the Overton window on abortion has changed. That's the reality. That's one of the things we have to remember here. This isn't about a ban. It's about where it stops and ends.
Clearly, we have a lot more to discuss. We have a lot more special coverage of the 2024 election as former President Trump closes in on the White House. Stay with us.
Kristen Welker hosts Meet the Press every Sunday on NBC.
And welcome back to our continuing election coverage. While former President Trump made inroads with Latinos and younger voters, Vice President Harris performed well among college graduates. But that doesn't appear to have been enough to push her over the finish line. How significant was the growing education divide? And what does that mean for Democrats moving forward? We want to pick up on that part of the conversation right now. Again, we're just getting some of the exit polling data in, so I don't know if we really know too much about that at this point. Chuck, do we?
No, I think that's something that we got to continue to unpack.
It's over the next few days. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
But is it, I mean, based on what you've shown us so far throughout the night, she underperformed with just about every other